Have you ever had to play peacekeeper in your household?
It's strange how something as simple as a dinner table can tell you exactly where you stand in your own family. I had no expectations walking into that restaurant, not because I didn't care, but because I've trained myself not to care too much. That night was supposed to be about Mom. Her 60th birthday, her big milestone. She picked the place herself, a pretentious little bistro with overpriced entrees and waiters who act like you're lucky just to be seated. I showed up on time, smiled, brought her favorite flowers, and sat quietly between my brother and the end of the table. No drama. No attitude. Just trying to be part of it. Present. Pleasant. The table was full. My brother, his wife, their 2 kids, all dressed up like they were about to meet royalty. My sister came with her new boyfriend, the one who plays the guitar and barely speaks unless it's about himself. My aunt and uncle drove in from out of town, and even my cousin made an appearance, the one who usually ignores family events unless there's free food. Everyone was there. Everyone had something to say. And when the appetizers came out, so did the surprises. My mom stood up with a little speech, nothing elaborate, just her usual rehearsed sweetness about how grateful she was for her family, how much she loved us all, how we made her life so full. She got emotional at the end, wiped her eyes, and then smiled at my brother. That was the signal. He reached under the table and pulled out a gift bag. Then my sister followed, then my cousin. Turns out, they had coordinated. Everyone had brought Mom a birthday gift, sure, but they also brought gifts for each other. Just a little something to say, "Thank you for always being there," my sister said to my brother. He laughed, handed her a small box, and made a joke about not crying in public. It wasn't some huge gift exchange. Just small things. A leather wallet for my uncle. A spa gift card for my aunt. Even the kids got books and toys. One by one, they unwrapped, smiled, posed for pictures, thanked each other like it was Christmas morning. And I just sat there, waiting, hoping maybe someone had something for me too. A token. A joke gift. A card. Even a cookie in a bag would have been something. But nothing came. Not even a glance in my direction. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and just moved past it. My sister's boyfriend took a picture of everyone holding their gifts. I wasn't in it. I wasn't asked to be. I watched the photo being taken from my seat, hands folded in my lap, nodding politely as if I wasn't slowly melting inside. It wasn't the gifts. I couldn't care less about candles or scarves or whatever nonsense they'd picked up at Target on the way. It was the message, the unspoken, blistering message, that I wasn't part of the group worth thinking about in advance. I didn't say a word. Not then. I stayed through dessert, smiled when someone made a bad joke about middle-aged crises, nodded when my mom opened her presents, even clapped when she gave a little thank you speech. And then, as the check came and everyone stood to say their goodbyes, I excused myself early. Said I had an early meeting. Hugged Mom, said happy birthday one more time, and walked out to my car. I sat there for a moment, the kind of pause where your hands don't quite know what to do. And then I took a photo. Just me in the driver's seat. Nothing dramatic, no tears, no forced smiles. Just me looking straight into the camera with that face you make when something finally clicks into place. I posted it without a caption, just tagged the location. Let it hang there. No explanation. Just silence. Sometimes, that says more than a paragraph ever could. I drove home without music. No calls, no texts, nothing. But about an hour later, my phone lit up. A message from my brother. One sentence, no greeting. What the hell was that supposed to mean? And I knew I had their attention now. The message came in while I was brushing my teeth, and I didn't even check it right away because, honestly, I thought it was going to be something dull, a group text with another picture from the night before, or maybe one of those mindless, great seeing everyone follow-ups my sister always sends to make herself look like the emotional glue of the family. But when I finally unlocked my phone and saw my brother's name pop up, followed by that one sharp line, what the hell was that supposed to mean? I just stared at it, toothbrush still in hand, like the words had been hand-delivered from a world where everything I suspected was suddenly confirmed. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because there was a certain power in letting him sit with the discomfort of not being in control of the narrative for once. I wasn't about to explain myself, not to the same person who'd sat beside me at that dinner table watching me get skipped over like I wasn't breathing the same air as the rest of them. I wanted him to feel uneasy. I wanted him to wonder. And more than that, I wanted to see just how fast the rest of them would start squirming once that one post, that one silent little photo, started cracking open the image of harmony they've been so desperate to maintain all these years. About an hour later, he tried again, this time with more edge. If you've got something to say, say it. Don't post weird stuff just to get attention. And that one made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so deeply ironic coming from the golden child of the family, the one who's spent his entire adult life chasing approval like it's a sport, the one who sends out mass emails about his kids' report cards and still expects applause when he replaces a light bulb. I wanted to reply something sharp, something like, "You mean like how you all put on that little performance last night and just hoped I'd pretend not to notice?" But I didn't. Not yet. Because I wanted to see how far he'd go when his authority wasn't immediately acknowledged. By mid-afternoon, my sister had chimed in with a casual "everything okay" under my post, pretending to care while absolutely fishing for drama. Like she wasn't sitting right there grinning when the gifts were passed around and I was left holding absolutely nothing. I didn't respond to her either, because if there's one thing they hate more than confrontation, it's ambiguity, and I was going to let that ambiguity turn into anxiety. That evening, the group chat, the sacred family first thread that I've long stopped contributing to, suddenly lit up with a round of nervous energy. My aunt posted a picture from the dinner. My cousin dropped in a random "love you guys." And then my mom, bless her fragile sense of control, finally sent the one I'd been waiting for. "Can we talk later, sweetheart?" Just us. That's when I knew the post had hit exactly where I aimed. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't public outrage, it wasn't even some long-winded caption dragging names. It was one quiet moment, one face that said, "You know what you did," and apparently they all did. I sat with the phone in my lap, remembering years of being asked to take the family photo, but never being in it. Years of showing up to support my brother's career moves, my sister's latest self-discovery projects, my cousin's fourth failed business, and still being the one whose job, whose choices, whose life never made it into the updates they sent to extended family or posted online. I remembered birthdays where my gifts were either forgotten or dismissed as thoughtful, that word people use when they don't actually value what you did, but feel obligated to say something kind. And all of that, the dismissals, the oversight, the way my presence was always expected but never celebrated, was finally catching up to them in one single moment of silence I chose not to break. Later that night, after dinner, I finally responded, not to the group chat, not to my sister, and not even to my mom's private plea. I went back to my brother's original message and typed. It meant exactly what it looked like. That was it. No explanation. No apology. No elaboration. I sent it and left the conversation open, knowing full well he'd be refreshing the screen waiting for more that wouldn't come. Within minutes, the typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. I imagined him sitting on his couch, maybe beside his wife, asking her if she thought I was trying to stir things up. Maybe he was reading through old messages, trying to pinpoint the moment things started going sideways. Maybe he was realizing that it hadn't started last night, that it had been building for years, and that the only difference now was that I had finally stopped pretending I didn't notice. That night, I didn't sleep easily. Not because I was upset, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't holding the weight of making everyone else comfortable anymore. I wasn't smoothing things over, I wasn't laughing things off, and I wasn't minimizing my own hurt just to keep the peace. I was letting them sit with it, letting them spin their wheels, letting them try to untangle a silence they no longer controlled. And I had no idea how far they'd go to fix the image or whether they'd even care enough to try, but I knew one thing for certain. They had noticed. They were nervous. And they knew they couldn't spin it this time. I wasn't surprised when Mom finally called, not just because of the message she'd sent earlier asking if we could talk, but because I could already hear the shape of the conversation before she even opened her mouth. Like I'd memorized her script from all the years I'd been the one expected to smooth over the tension, patch up the cracks, and pretend everything was fine even when I was the one bleeding. Her voice came through the phone a little too bright, that forced lightness she always used when she was about to say something uncomfortable but wanted it to sound casual, and she opened with, "Hi honey, I just wanted to make sure you got home okay last night." Like the dinner hadn't ended in a silence so loud I'm sure it rang in all of their ears on the ride home. I said yes, I got home fine, and waited, letting the silence stretch a bit too long on my end because I knew what she was stalling for, and she took the bait, filling it with that careful kind of ramble mothers use when they're trying to frame something before actually saying it. She started with how lovely the dinner was, how happy she was to have everyone together, how proud she was of you kids for always showing up even with everyone's busy schedules. I didn't interrupt. I didn't even nod. I just let her talk herself into the corner she was clearly building toward, until finally she hesitated, just slightly, and said, "I hope you didn't feel left out last night, you know, with the little gifts and all." That was the moment. The test. I could have made it easy on her. I could have brushed it off with a laugh, made a joke about how I didn't need a scented candle to feel appreciated, or even said I didn't notice, which would have been the biggest lie of all. But I didn't do any of that. I let the silence return, heavier this time, and then said, calmly but clearly, I didn't feel left out, I was left out. That stopped her. Just for a second. And then the excuses began, tumbling over each other like clumsy dancers, none of them sticking, none of them new. She said she thought I wouldn't care, that I've never really been into gifts, which is something she's decided about me to justify her forgetfulness, not something I've ever actually said. She said my siblings had coordinated the exchange without telling her, which I knew was a lie because she had smiled through every moment of it like a proud ringmaster watching her circus perform. She said I seemed a little distant lately, as if that were a reason to exclude me rather than a symptom of being constantly treated like an afterthought. And when none of those landed, she tried the ultimate fallback, the one I've come to recognize as her final defense. "You know I love you the same as the others." That's the line that always comes when there's nothing left to defend, and every time she says it, it stings a little less, not because it's true, but because I've finally stopped expecting it to be. I told her I didn't doubt that she loved me, but I also told her that love doesn't excuse neglect, that loving someone while consistently treating them like they matter less is a contradiction. One that doesn't go unnoticed just because the person on the receiving end doesn't raise their voice about it. She was quiet after that, and I could almost picture her sitting on the edge of her bed, one hand on her neck like she does when she's feeling overwhelmed, trying to decide whether to fight or fold. She didn't say sorry. Not really. Just mumbled something about wishing things hadn't come across that way, which is another thing people say when they want to pretend the hurt wasn't real, only misunderstood. I didn't press her. I didn't ask for an apology or try to teach her a lesson. I just let it sit, because for once, I wasn't going to carry the burden of making her feel better about how she made me feel worse. After the call, I sat with it for a while. Not angry, not crying, just still. Tired of being the one who always had to be the bigger person, the one who gives the benefit of the doubt, the one who lets things go for the sake of keeping the family calm. And I realized I didn't need a dramatic confrontation to make my point. What I needed was to make it clear that I wasn't going to play the same role anymore, the quiet one, the peacemaker, the one who's expected to understand why she's never fully seen. So I opened my social media again and posted another photo, this one from last year's Thanksgiving, where everyone else was in the frame and I was the one holding the camera. I didn't say anything in the caption. Just wrote, "Funny how history repeats itself." And I knew they'd see it. I knew they'd feel it. Because they remember that day, and they remember me asking if someone else could take a photo so I could be in one for once, and they also remember how no one ever did. Within the hour, my sister commented, "You always make everything about you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because every time they tried to dismiss me, they only made the pattern more obvious. And this time, I was letting the pattern speak louder than I ever had. There's something incredibly revealing about how quickly people go from pretending everything is fine to scrambling for damage control the moment their polished little version of reality starts cracking at the edges. And over the next 48 hours, it became crystal clear to me that the post I'd made, simple, quiet, and perfectly calculated, had done far more damage than any shouted confrontation or tearful confession ever could have, because unlike the arguments we used to have behind closed doors, this was happening out in the open, in front of the very people they always tried to impress. It started with my cousin, the same cousin who barely acknowledged me at the dinner and had made a whole speech about how grateful she was for the family's support during her divorce, even though she hadn't texted me back in 3 years. Suddenly reaching out in the comments section of that old photo I posted, asking if I was doing okay in that annoying, performative way people use when they don't actually care about the answer but want to be seen caring. I didn't reply, not because I didn't have a lot I could have said, but because I was beginning to understand that silence, when used intentionally, can carry more power than any monologue they wouldn't bother to finish reading anyway. By the time I woke up the next morning, the family group chat had shifted in tone. It had gone from celebratory chatter about mom's birthday to this weird, passive-aggressive minefield of carefully worded messages and thinly veiled attempts at pretending nothing was wrong while also clearly trying to push me to either explain myself or walk it all back. My aunt, who's always been the self-appointed voice of reason, dropped a message about how families go through ups and downs and how we should all focus on love instead of division, which was hilarious considering she hadn't said a word when the entire dinner table passed gifts around me like I was invisible. Then, in what I can only assume was a coordinated attempt to take back control of the narrative, my sister sent a long message to the group, dripping with fake warmth, claiming that the gift exchange wasn't meant to be exclusionary, that it just happened organically because they all had such strong connections lately, and that maybe it came across the wrong way, but no one meant to leave anyone out. That phrase, "came across the wrong way," stuck with me because it was another classic example of how they take the blame off themselves by putting the burden of misinterpretation on the person who is hurt. I didn't reply to her either. Not yet. I wanted to give them more time to reveal how fragile the image really was, and they did not disappoint. My brother, who had started this whole chain reaction by sending me that angry message, finally snapped in the chat. He wrote, "Can we all stop acting like we did something horrible? If she's upset, fine, but posting stuff like that is just attention-seeking, and, honestly, it's toxic." That was the moment I realized they still didn't get it, or worse, that they did get it and just didn't want to admit it, because in their minds, the real offense wasn't what they had done, it was that I hadn't kept it quiet. And so, I made a choice. I screenshotted a few old text exchanges, nothing extreme, just a handful of moments that painted a very clear picture. One was from a few months ago, when I'd been sick and asked if someone could bring over groceries, and both my siblings had read the message and never replied. Another was from last Christmas, when I offered to host and got a response from my brother that said, "Let's do it at Mom's, it's easier for everyone." I posted those on my story with no names, just timestamps and the caption, "Patterns speak louder than apologies." That's when the real chaos started. Within an hour, my phone lit up with missed calls from Mom, from my aunt, from my sister, even from my cousin's ex-husband, which made no sense, but somehow felt fitting. My sister sent a direct message accusing me of airing private family matters just to make people look bad, and when I didn't respond, she followed it with, "Do you even want to be part of this family anymore?" And that question told me everything I needed to know. Because what she really meant was, do you want to keep playing along with the story where we're the good guys and you're just overly sensitive when things don't go your way? I didn't answer her, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I had finally stopped needing their approval to justify my own experiences. Instead, I posted one last thing, not a photo, not a screenshot, just a plain black screen with the words, "Being part of a family shouldn't mean erasing yourself to keep others comfortable." I turned off my phone after that, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I had nothing left to defend. I wasn't trying to win an argument. I wasn't trying to convince them anymore. I had stopped asking for space in a room that was never built for me in the first place. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt deliberate. By the time I turned my phone back on the next day, the family group chat was silent. No messages, no reactions, no half-hearted attempts at peacemaking. Just stillness. The kind that comes not from resolution, but from the uncomfortable realization that maybe the person you've been ignoring has finally learned how to be heard without raising her voice. I didn't wake up that morning expecting anything dramatic to happen. And I certainly hadn't planned to be the one to finally rupture whatever fragile illusion of unity my family was still desperately clinging to after days of quiet hostility and carefully worded texts. But there's a particular kind of exhaustion that sets in when you've been tiptoeing around people's egos your whole life, and eventually it stops being about revenge or even validation and becomes more about reclaiming the space. You were always expected to shrink inside, and that's exactly what I intended to do when I saw the notification that the new group dinner had been rescheduled and, once again, everyone had confirmed but me. It was supposed to be a casual follow-up dinner, something low-key at Mom's house, just the immediate circle, nothing fancy, she'd written in the new invite. As though the scaled-back setting would somehow erase the fact that the last gathering had exposed just how far their favoritism and passive cruelty had spread. I hadn't planned on going, not because I was trying to be petty, but because I'd reached the point where showing up just to be ignored again felt more degrading than staying home. But then I got a private message from my mother, short and clearly rehearsed, saying, "I think it would mean a lot to everyone if you came." There was no apology in that message, no acknowledgement of what had happened, just a subtle attempt to pull me back into the role I had always played, the one where I show up, smile, forgive without being asked, and make things easy for everyone. And for a moment, I almost deleted it. But then I realized that maybe I didn't need to stay home to make a point. Maybe this time, I could walk into that house with my head held higher than I ever had before, not looking for confrontation, not asking for recognition, but simply refusing to let their silence define me any longer. So I went. I arrived late on purpose, not so late that it would be disrespectful, but late enough that every chair was already filled and every conversation had already started without me, just as it always had. When I walked in, no one said anything at first. My brother looked up, surprised but unreadable. My sister gave me that tight, obligatory smile she uses when she doesn't know whether to fake affection or brace for impact. Mom, who had been refilling drinks, walked over and gave me a hug that felt more like a negotiation than a greeting. I sat down at the one empty chair, unsurprisingly placed at the corner of the table where I could barely participate in any of the ongoing conversations, and I let them all carry on like it was just another normal dinner. I answered questions politely when asked. I complimented the food. I didn't bring up the posts or the fallout or the things they had said about me in their private chats, some of which had made their way to me through people who were finally starting to see the difference between keeping peace and enabling harm. I waited. And then, just before dessert, when Mom stood up to thank everyone for coming, yet again making no mention of the elephant in the room, I asked, as calmly as if I were commenting on the weather, if I could say something. There was a pause, the kind that makes forks stop halfway to mouths and heads turn slightly, and then Mom nodded, clearly nervous, but too polite to say no in front of everyone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse or insult or cry. I simply pulled out a folded sheet of paper from my bag, one I'd printed earlier that day, with screenshots of every time I had been asked to give, support, host, donate, drive, show up, and pitch in, without receiving so much as a thank you. I read a few of them aloud, slowly, without emotion, letting the dates and the words speak for themselves. Then I shared the list of events I hadn't been invited to, the gifts that had been exchanged without me, the family photos I had taken but never appeared in, the birthday I had spent alone while they were all at my brother's lake house, even though they'd told me they were keeping it small this year. No one interrupted me. Not because they agreed, but because the sheer accumulation of detail made it impossible to deny, and because, deep down, every single one of them already knew it was true. When I finished, I folded the paper again, placed it neatly beside my untouched dessert plate, and looked around the table. "I don't need anything from anyone here," I said, not an apology, not validation, not even acknowledgement. But I needed you all to know that I noticed. I've always noticed. And I'm done pretending I didn't. I stood up, thanked my mother for dinner, and left before anyone could scramble to save face. The next morning, I woke up to a single message, not from my brother, not from my sister, not from mom, but from my cousin's ex-husband, the one who had always been treated like a ghost at family functions, who simply wrote, "That was the most honest thing anyone's ever said at one of those dinners." I didn't post about it. I didn't need to. The silence that followed said enough. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the invisible one. I felt like the only one who had finally told the truth.